once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, even more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Good evening, and may the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. This is our episode number 7 on our subject, the beast and its image. Now, I would like to begin our study in answer number 2 on page 80. Every Christian should remember that as the truth is ever advancing, it will not be found today where it was yesterday, and that therefore Christ's followers must advance with it. They will not follow the examples of the Jews and the Romans. In 2TG number 19 on page 17, it says concerning the Jews, they are as unmovable as were the priests, scribes, and Pharisees in Jesus' day. God forbid that any of us should thus lose out. 2TG 19, page 17. They are as unmovable as were the priests, scribes, and Pharisees in Jesus' day. God forbid that any of us should thus lose out. In 1TG number 51, again it says, if the world does not stand still, if it makes the progress it does, then why should the church stand still? Why should the church not know more of God and more of the Bible today than she did yesterday? Why should Christianity be proud of not adding Bible doctrines? What a world this would be if everything was not moving ahead as it is. If we were to compare the world's increased knowledge and accomplishment in the last 50 or 100 years with the church's increased knowledge and accomplishments in the same period of time, we may see that there is no comparison whatsoever. Look at the progress the world has made, and look at the stupidity which the church is cultivating. Yes, I say cultivating because it seems that rather than bemoaning the fact of not having added or discarded a doctrine, and rather than encouraging the people to be on the watch for God's visitation, they are making it their business to keep the laity from coming in contact with God's messengers and His progressive truth with meat in due season. With God's message for today, anything that does not originate in their own conventions, the laity are told to have nothing to do with it. This they do simply because they themselves do not accept the truth God sends. And because if any of their congregation come in contact with and accept it, they naturally will have to join truth wherever truth is. So it is their chief business to keep the laity in darkness and in fear that someone is to deceive them if they expose themselves to anything that their ministers do not approve. The Spirit of prophecy told us that it is a misery which to be lamented. It says here in the Great Controversy 292, for my part, I cannot sufficiently bewail the condition of the Reformed churches who are come to a period in religion and will go at present no further than the instruments of their reformation. The Lutherans cannot be drawn to go beyond what Luther saw. The Calvinists, you see, stick fast where they were left by that great man of God, who yet saw not all things. This is a misery much to be lamented, for though they were burning and shining lights in their time, yet they penetrated not into the whole counsel of God, but where they now living would be as willing to embrace further light as that which they first received. Herein, answerer number 1, page 70. It says here, answerer number 1, page 70. In varying ways, the fatal weakness which has characterized every movement, from that of Israel to that of Laodicea, has been in laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 1. And what is still more basic and more urgently to the point is that each movement alike failed to progress from one message to the next and to go on to reach its final goal of transcendental attainments in divine knowledge. Instead, each fell from the heights of its own early rich experience back down to spiritual poverty because it failed to keep pace with the truth. Each divinely called movement came to a standstill where it contentedly satisfied itself that it was yet in the sanctified steps to the mount of perfection, that it was flourishing, and that peace and spiritual prosperity were in all its borders, when in reality, quite the opposite was the truth. I would like to read this reading and answerer number 1 on page 50. It says here, answerer number 1 on page 50. And the truly wise gave no concern to these discrepant teachings, but gladly accepted the truth in its progressive form, and went on to higher and higher spiritual attainments, whereas those who stumbled on this disparity either rejected John as a false prophet and accepted Jesus as the Christ, or accepted John as a true prophet and rejected Jesus as a false Christ, and consequently slipped farther and farther backwards and downwards until they were no longer followers of either Christ or John. Answerer number 1, page 50. Here the statement in track number 14 on page 43. I would like to read this reading. Track number 14 on page 43. It says, the urgent lesson here to be learned is that those who are ever progressing, keeping pace with the march of truth, are the only real Christians. Track number 14, page 43. The urgent lesson here to be learned is that those who are ever progressing, keeping pace with the march of truth, are the only real Christians. So that is the only real Christians, those who continually progress with the march of truth. I love so much this statement in 1 TG 51, page 9, and then page 13. It says here, this is how it has been all through the centuries. This is why not one of the churches has climbed any higher than the founders left them. And this is why Christians, rather than growing into the unity of the faith, are with each passing day becoming more and more disunited in faith and hostile to each other's faith. We know that the founder of the Bedean is B.T. Hotep, and B.T. Hotep died in 1955. Would you think the Bedean is not included with this admonition, brothers and sisters? And then it says, to boast, therefore, that one's denomination has never added a doctrine or laid off one is to admit that his church is at a standstill, virtually saying, we are rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing, when in fact they are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked, but know it not. Very obviously, religion is something which grows and unfolds, but its people as an organization have never kept pace with it. The most astonishing part of it is that those who have led the denominations after the death of their founders, rather than teach the laity to watch and wait for more revealed truth, instead are teaching that their church has all the truth and that there is need of no more. Here in page 13, 1 TG 51, page 13. Religion, brother, sister, is not something dead and waning. It is something living and growing, and God's people grow with it. And now in closing, I wish to leave this question for you to ponder and to answer to yourself. Is this experience, the experience of progressing with truth, your experience? If it is not, then why not? Yes, why? Is it not worth everything? money, houses, lands, friends, mothers, fathers, husbands, or wives? Is it not worth all this in order to double them? 1TG 51, page 13. Now, let us now focus our understanding to the beast study. And my admonition is that, according to track number 5, on page 6, I would like to read this reading. It says, "Do not allow what you have believed or practiced in the past to control your understanding." Track number 5, page 6. Do not allow what you have believed or practiced in the past to control your understanding. Now, let us carefully study this very important subject. The admonition given in 2SR 118 in reality is applied definitely on the subject concerning the beast. I would like to read 2SR 118. It says, "This grammatical rule is followed in the scriptures, and it is one way to recognize present truth." So the grammatical rule must be strictly followed, for it is one way to recognize present truth. And here in Old Symbolic Code, 3 Symbolic Code number 7, page 4, says, "You yourself know that such careless and thoughtless interpretations which pay no attention to language and which obey neither rule nor logic are not inspired but are private and thus inevitably false." 3 Symbolic Code number 7, page 4. And also the statement in Old Symbolic Code, 2 Symbolic Code numbers 7 and 8, page 10. "Hence, as there are no useless words in either of the writings, those who desire to know the truth must carefully mark every word. Otherwise, they will never comprehend the truth. And as a consequence, they will be driven by the winds as the waves of the sea. Until the winds cease blowing, probation closes, and they be left to sink down in their sins as do the waves in the sea." And in 1SR 244, it says, 1SR 244, this is the statement saying, "It is wonderful to note the inspiration of the scriptures. Perfect they are when their appointed time is come. Only at such an occasion are the scriptures grammatically correct." So that is the statement, brothers and sisters, that only in the appointed time, or if the application of such event, the grammar could not exactly fit, then for sure that is not the perfect fulfillment of the prophecy. For if it is the perfect fulfillment of the prophecy, then it should be perfectly grammatically correct. So let us now carefully study every statement, brothers and sisters, that we are going to read, and let us compare all the inspired statements, because that is the only inviolable rule of interpretation, right? In answerer number 3, page 41, it says, "Let us remember always to observe the inviolable rule that an interpretation of one inspired statement must harmonize with all other related statements." Answerer number 3, page 41. That is the only inviolable rule of interpretation, that one statement must harmonize all others related statements. Or we need to compare, when we study the shepherd's rod, we need to compare the entire shepherd's rod publications. So it is very important, brothers and sisters, to compare the entire shepherd's rod publications, because according to Old Symbolic Code, it says, 3 Symbolic Code, number 1, page 9, "A conclusion which is based upon a single citation, do the passage be ever so plain, but which conclusion cannot be harmonized with every other authoritative statement on the same subject, is not a safe and honest rule of interpretation." And then the other paragraph, it says, "If we cannot harmonize any one particular statement with the foregoing facts, we would then be better off to be out of harmony with the one than to disregard all the other statements, none of which we can controvert." 3 Symbolic Code number 1, page 9. Now, let us begin our study in 2SR page 113. 2SR page page 113. It says, note that the dragon of Revelation 12 verse 3 has the crowns on his heads, not on his horns. It has been previously explained that when the crowns appear on the heads, it denotes a religio-political system. But if they appear on the horns, it reveals that the state is independent of the church. So, that is very plain. Now, here's another statement that I would like to read in 2SR. Page 88 and page 89. And I think the same statement. It says here, the crowns represent civil authority. Reading 2SR page 88 and 89. The crowns represent civil authority as previously explained. Had they been on the heads like on the dragon of Revelation 12 verse 3, it would denote that the churches are using the civil arm of the state to propagate their dogma as in the days of imperial and papal Rome, represented by the dragon. Now, the statement is very plain, brothers and sisters, that in the period of pagan Rome, imperial Rome, as well as in the period of papal Rome, the church are using the civil arm of the state to propagate their doctrines, their dogma. But such occurrences was not portrayed in the symbolization of the nondescript beast, either the first stage or the second stage. Because according to our reading, the only symbolization by which such religious political system is described when the crowns appear on the heads. Now let us read again the statement in 2SR 113. Note that the dragon of Revelation 12 verse 3 has the crowns on his heads and not on his horns. It has been previously explained that when the crowns appear on the heads, it denotes a religio-political system. There was a religio-political system during the period of pagan Rome, according to our reading in 2SR page 88 and page 89. There was a religio-political system in the period of the second stage of pagan Rome, the papacy, during the little horn head. But the absolute fact is that such description, religio-political system, are not described in the symbolization of the nondescript beast, first stage, even on the nondescript beast, second stage, because the only symbolization by which it portrays a religio-political system is only on the red dragon, by which the crowns appears on the heads. Revelation 12 verse 3. Now, it is undeniable fact that, brothers and sisters, in the period of the two-horned beast, it was predicted beforehand, according to SR 151, a religio-political government. And again, it does not portray in the two-horned beast. Because the two-horned beast, brothers and sisters, there was no such description that the heads are being crowned. Now, it says here in 2SR 151, the two-horned beast is the only one representing a local religio-political government. Now, that statement, religio-political government, to repeat again, brothers and sisters, it cannot be found in the description of the two-horned beast, but rather only on the red dragon. And not only in the two-horned beast, as well as in the period of the scarlet-colored beast. There is a predicted event, religio-political government. Then we can easily understand, brothers and sisters, that the red dragon cannot be limited only in the period of pagan Rome, papal Rome, but the red dragon, brothers and sisters, the description is continuous. And that is the reason why, according to the shepherd's rod here in 2SR 119, 2SR page 119, the red dragon in Revelation 12 verse 3 cannot be numbered with the numerous beasts, for he is not a symbol of a particular nation or government. He represents Satan and his schemes at certain times, for he is called the devil and Satan. Why is it that the red dragon cannot be numbered with the numerous beasts in the procession of the beast? Because the red dragon is said to be Satan, and his ultimate aim is to destroy God's people. meaning wherever God's people will be, the dragon will always be there. So he cannot be represented by particular nation because he is moving from one nation to another. Now, for example, here in track number 15, let's read, I think, page 85. Track number 15, page 85 and page 86. Unquestionably, therefore, the wilderness where the woman was nourished for the time being is the land of the Gentiles, and the woman's having to flee from the face of the serpent in her homeland shows that the dragon had made the Holy Land his headquarters. Not satisfied with this, though, he even followed her into the wilderness. Track number 15, pages 85 and page 86. So, in that reading, we can immediately discern that the particular object in view of the red dragon is to destroy the woman. Because at the time when he had been able to conquer the entire Palestine, after all the apostles died in 180, the Palestine became the dragon's headquarters. But at the moment he discovered that the woman was no longer in the vineyard, the woman is already in the wilderness, he followed the woman in the wilderness. So the ultimate aim of the dragon is to destroy the woman. But as far as the words of Jesus Christ are thus concerned, there is no possibility that he could be able to destroy the woman, because his power is limited by God. And the declaration, I would like to read again the Great Controversy 505. Let's read the Great Controversy, page 505. It says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall browse thy head, and thou shalt browse his heel. Genesis 3, verse 15. The divine sentence pronounced against Satan after the fall of man was also a prophecy embracing all the ages to the close of time and foreshadowing the great conflict to engage all the races of men who should live upon the earth. The Great Controversy, page 505. Notice that in Genesis 3, verse 15, the main subject is concerning the woman and the serpent. And the divine sentence decreed that there should be a continual enmity between thee, which is the serpent, and the woman, and between thy seed, the seed of the serpent, and her seed, the seed of the woman. It shall browse thy head. So it was predicted beforehand that the woman shall browse the head of the serpent, and thou shalt browse his heel. Genesis 3, verse 15. Why is it that it is inscribed in masculine gender, his heel, rather than her heel? Because that portion is pointing to Jesus Christ. Now, I would like to read this reading in 1888. Let me read to you the statement. It says here that accordingly, on the first advent of Jesus Christ, let us read the statement here. But there are two comings of the seed. There is another, the second coming of Christ, as well as there was the first coming of Jesus Christ. The seed is definitely pointing to Jesus Christ, right? Even Apostle Paul in Galatians 3 on verse 15, it says, verse 16 rather, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He said not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. Galatians chapter 3 verse 16. Now let us read this reading in 1888. It says, but there are two comings of the seed. There is another, the second coming of Christ, as well as there was the first. Is it impossible that this second coming of the seed should be the coming referred to in this passage? There are other similar expressions in the scripture. For instance, Ezekiel 21 verse 27, speaking of the removing of the diadem and crown of the king of Judah, it says, I will overturn it, and it shall be no more. until he come, whose right it is, and I will give it to him. What coming is this? The answer to this question can be given only by a consideration of the facts. In the case, he came, but instead of receiving that crown, he received a crown of thorns. Instead of being seated upon the throne, he was nailed to the cross. So we know that that was not the coming referred to in the text, but that it is his second coming, seated upon the throne of his father David, and having on his hand many crowns. Then it is that the kingdom of this world becomes the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Revelation 11 verse 15. And this is the coming of him whose right it is, that is referred to in the text, and then it will be given him. Again it is written that the seed of the woman should browse the serpent's head. That seed came and did not browse the serpent's head, but himself was browsed instead. Isaiah 53 verse 5. And after he had come, and had thus been browsed even to death, had risen again from the dead, and had ascended to heaven, even 30 years after these things it was written, the God of peace shall browse Satan under your feet shortly. Romans 16 verse 20. So, the voice of inspirations are reminding us that in reality, the perfect fulfillment of Galatians chapter 3 verse 16 to 19, Ezekiel 21 verse 27, and Genesis 3 verse 15 must be fulfilled at the second coming of Christ. But that second coming of Christ for sure cannot be the second visible coming of Jesus Christ, but rather it is the second invisible coming of Jesus Christ. Now, for example, I would like to read to you here in 1SR. So let's read this statement. Now, 1SR on page 212 and 213. The combination of the beast. In Revelation 13, verse 1 and 2, it says, in his makeup is the evidence that he comes on the stage of action after the four great universal empires, namely Babylon, Medo-Persia, Grecia, and Rome. Thus he became the fifth beast, representing the period which followed the fall of Rome. The 10 horns of both beasts, Daniel 7 verse 7 and Revelation 13 verse 1, as well as the 10 toes of Daniel 2 verse 42, represent the same 10 kingdoms into which Rome was divided. And then it says, brothers and sisters, these 10 kings personate the civilization in the fifth period, or the one which followed Rome to our own time, and on to the second coming of Christ, according to Daniel 2 verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. So the voice of inspiration plainly telling us that Daniel 2 verse 44, Daniel 2 verse 44 is pointing to the second coming of Christ. In the days of these kings, pointing to the 10 crown horns, brothers and sisters. So, we need to study closely the second invisible coming of Jesus Christ, when Jesus Christ will set up the kingdom of God, brothers and sisters, which shall never be destroyed. Now, for example, here in Answerer number 1, page 24, we hold it to be a simple, self-evident truth that as the stone in Daniel 2 verse 34 is symbolical of the kingdom, and that as it smites the toes of the image, it necessarily must be set up before it smites them. Just as Daniel said, in the days of these kings, the two kings, the kings of today, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. In the days of these kings cannot mean after their days, and unless the kingdom is set up, brought into being, it cannot smite the nations. Answerer number 1, page 24. So, the voice of inspiration are plainly telling brethren that this kingdom will be set up by Jesus Christ, not before their days, neither after their days, but rather during the time when these kings are still reigning. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom. and that is the stone kingdom, brothers and sisters. Now, for example, let us connect answerer number 2 on page 17. It says here, and it is concerning Micah chapter 4, verses 1 to 4. Let me read to you the statement. Conclusively, therefore, do not forget that this commentary is explaining Micah chapter 4, verse 1 to verse 4. It says, conclusively, therefore, the kingdom church, so the shepherds had called it the kingdom church, must be set up before the devil turns upon the remnant, those who are left behind and who are then being gathered, and against whom he wars for refusing to worship him in the person of the beast and his image. Now let us focus first to Micah chapter 4, verses 1 to 4. To repeat again the statement here in answerer number 2, page 17, saying, conclusively, therefore, the kingdom church must be set up. I think the other term must be, the kingdom church must be in existence. Conclusively, therefore, the kingdom church must be set up before the devil turns upon the remnant. Who are they, the remnant mentioned here? Those who are left behind and who are then being gathered, and against whom he wars for refusing to worship him in the person of the beast and his image. Answerer number 2 on page 17. Now, to get the full beam of light concerning this passage, we need to connect first Micah chapter 4 and then go back to our study. Remember, we already read in 1 SR 212 and 213 that Daniel 2 verse 44 is pointing to the second coming of Christ. But for sure, 100%, that second coming of Christ cannot be the second visible coming of Jesus Christ, but rather the second invisible coming of Jesus Christ. Because the only thing which is commonly known by mostly Christians are the second visible coming of Jesus Christ. But we are talking about the second invisible coming of Jesus Christ. The shepherd's rod plainly told us in 2TG number 44, page 44. I would like to read 2TG 44, page 44. The signs of the kingdom, you see, are even more important for one to observe than are the signs of Christ's coming. If one should miss the signs of the kingdom, then the knowledge of the signs of Christ's coming would profit nothing. For all such will be frightened at his appearing and say to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? Revelation 6, verse 16 and verse 17. Now for sure, brothers and sisters, the coming mentioned here could not be the visible coming of Jesus Christ. Because at the second visible coming of Jesus Christ, there will be no more mountains. Let us read the old symbolic code. I would like to read 2 symbolic code number 10, page 8. Consequently, if we place the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy after the 7 last plagues, we would make the revelator contradict Isaiah. For if the mountains disappeared just before Christ's coming, concerning Christ's visible coming, how could the wicked hide themselves in them? Consequently, if our understanding of Revelation 16 verse 17 to 21 is correct, then Isaiah 2 verse 19 to 21 must be fulfilled before the 7 last plagues. Now here in 2 symbolic code number 10, page 8, the voice of inspiration is very plain by telling us, brothers and sisters, that in the second visible coming of Jesus Christ, there will be no more mountains that would be in existence. All mountains disappeared. So the coming mentioned here in 2TG 44, page 44, cannot be the visible coming of Jesus Christ, brothers and sisters. And the shepherd's rod is saying that the signs of the kingdom is even more important to observe than Christ's coming mentioned in Revelation 6 verse 16 and 17. Now what is Christ's coming mentioned in Revelation 6 verse 16 and 17? For sure, this is the coming by which most Davidian are looking for. The 7 days is slaughtering. Therefore, the statement, the signs of the kingdom, this kingdom, brothers and sisters, will be established prior to the time of the 7 days slaughtering. Because this kingdom will be established while the 10 horns are still being crowns. At the commencement of the little time of trouble, I would like to read track number 12 on page 32. Now from the manifest similarity between the leopard-like beast and the scarlet-colored beast, one should recognize that the latter is the image of the former, his deadly one having been healed and his horns uncrowned. The crownless horns of the latter show that he represents the world in a time in which there are no crowned kings, but that instead the world is ruled by an ecclesiastical head, the woman that drives the beast. Track number 12, page 32. Now, the voice of inspiration says, brothers and sisters, that at the time when the woman rides the scarlet-colored beast, in that period of time, the crown horns of the leopard-like beast were completely uncrowned. Now, we can immediately discern the statement in Answerer number 1, page 24, saying that the kingdom church, the stone kingdom, must be established prior to the time when the crown horns will be uncrowned. Because the Bible is very plain by saying, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom, cannot be mean after their days. But at the time when the woman rides the scarlet-colored beast, the 10 horns of the leopard-like beast will be completely uncrowned. Then we can immediately discern and understand that this kingdom must be established prior to the time when the woman rides the scarlet-colored beast. Brothers and sisters, that must be the absolute fact. And to repeat again, the shepherd's rod is, while describing the kingdom church, he attached it to the prophecy on Micah chapter 4, and more particularly on Micah chapter 4, verse 1. Now let us read 1 SR. Concerning Micah, let us read, brothers and sisters. Micah chapter 4, 1 SR, page 173. It says, what is the meaning of the 4th chapter of Micah? So it says, what is the meaning of the 4th chapter of Micah? But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. Micah 4 verse 1. The scripture is unmistakably clear that it was intended for the last days, for it reads, but in the last days it shall come to pass. It is also positive that the scripture would be fulfilled, for it says, it shall come to pass. It is an accepted fact that nearly all Bible students agree that the mountain spoken of in this chapter is a symbol of God's church, denomination, of which the temple built on Mount Moriah was a type. Now, the mountain mentioned in Micah chapter 4 verse 1, according to the shepherd's rod, it is pointing, typifying to the temple that was built on Mount Moriah. Who built the temple on Mount Moriah? It is Solomon, the son of David. And for sure, the one who will build this temple, the antitypical temple on Mount Moriah, must be the son of David, and that is Jesus Christ, the antitypical Solomon, the son of David, brothers and sisters. And I would like to read again. It says, it is an accepted fact that nearly all Bible students agree that the mountain spoken of in this chapter is a symbol of God's church, denomination, of which the temple built on Mount Moriah was a type. And I would like to read to you the temple that was built on Mount Moriah, how the shepherd's rod described, brothers and sisters. I would like to read 1 SR 166. Let's read. It says, that beautiful temple reveals God's desire for His church. For this reason, God lavished so much wealth upon this palatial structure upon Mount Moriah. According to estimates given in the monthly bulletin of the Illinois Society of Architects, it reached the tremendous total of more than $87 billion. The several estimates show the total cost to have been $87,212,210,840. This sum represents a nation's wealth. The question is, how did Israel even raise such an enormous sum of money to lavish on one single structure? God never asks us to do anything unless He Himself makes it possible. 1 SR page 166. Now let us go back again to the statement in 1 SR page 173. It says, it is accepted fact that nearly all Bible students agree that the mountain spoken of in this chapter is a symbol of God's church denomination, of which the temple built on Mount Moriah was a type. That's Micah 4 verse 1, pointing to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. 100%. The answer is no. Thus, the prediction in Micah chapter 4 verse 1 been fulfilled in the days of Beti-Hotep? The absolute answer, no. It was still unfulfilled. Now, brothers and sisters, I would like to read first here in 2SR. 2SR 262, it says, first temple, literally greater, but the second is spiritually greater. Now, it is pointing to the two literal temples in the Old Testament. The temple that was built in Mount Moriah by Solomon, and the temple that was built in Mount Zion by Haggai, Zechariah, Zerubbabel, Joshua, and with all others. And accordingly, as far as the Bible is thus concerned, in the book of Haggai, on chapter 1 and chapter 2, the first temple, the first literal temple, which is the temple of Solomon, is literally greater than the second literal temple. But the second literal temple is spiritually greater than the first literal temple. Now, let us read the statement here in 2SR page 262. There was something glorious with both temples, and the greatness of the one was as nothing in comparison with the other. The first visibly exceeded the second, and the second spiritually exceeded the first. But the glorious gift to both was unsurpassable, as the one represents the early Christian church and the other the last section of the same church. It is evident that both sections were endowed with great glory, but the glory of the early church was literal and of the latter spiritual according to types. Now, I would like to focus to the statement of the same church. So the comparison must be the same church. Now, for example, the Apostolic Church. The first section of the Apostolic Church from 27 AD to 31 AD, and the second section is 31 AD to 100 AD. The first section is literally greater because Christ's visible presence is within them. Christ is among them, Christ's visible presence. But at the time when Jesus Christ ascended to heaven on May 27, 31 AD, and 10 days after, the former rain power was poured out to the 120 disciples, and the converts every day, thousands upon thousands. So the second section of the same church is spiritually greater than the first section of the same church. The first section is literally greater. Why? Because the presence, the visible presence of Jesus Christ is among them. But the conversion of truth was nothing in comparison in the second section of the same church. So the second section is spiritually greater than the first section. Now, let us continue. To SR 262, it says, the early Christian church was literally greater because Christ, the headstone of the corner, appeared at that time in his visible human form. Thus, the literal magnificence of Solomon's temple was a perfect symbol. But the type reveals that the glory of the early church was as nothing in comparison with the latter section of the same church. Therefore, the visible presence of Christ in his human form in the early church was as nothing in comparison with His invisible presence in the closing work of the gospel church. Now, the comparison must be the same church, but as well, the comparison to the apostolic church, the candlestick, the second candlestick in Revelation 11 verse 3 is also nothing in comparison with the golden candlesticks in Zechariah chapter 4. But the fact is that there must be a definite comparison between the sections of the same church. The first section of the 8th church in the New Testament succession, or the first section of the 10th church, brothers and sisters. And it was represented by Mount Moriah, the antitypical Mount Moriah, antitypical temple built in Mount Moriah, and the antitypical temple built in Mount Zion. Then in this study, let us distinctly separate Mount Moriah and Mount Zion. Otherwise, where is the comparison? But as far as the Bible and the shepherd's rod is thus concerned, the kingdom to be established prior to the time of the little time of trouble, while the 10 horns are still crowns, not yet uncrowned, is literally greater than the kingdom to be established after the 10 horns had been uncrowned, which is the kingdom to be established on Mount Zion. But the kingdom to be established on Mount Zion must be spiritually greater than the kingdom to be established as the antitypical temple, Mount Moriah. Now, I would like to connect our reading in 1TG, still Micah chapter 4, 1TG 25 on page 4. But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. Then it says, although Micah forspoke sad news for ancient Judah, he forspoke this joyful news for Judah of the latter days. Trying indeed must it have been for Judah to look forward to her own destruction. Conversely, though, it must have encouraged her to know that the time would come for her to return and to build the old waste places, to raise up the foundations of many generations, Isaiah 58 verse 12. And still more joyful should she now be to learn that the time for her returning to God and to the homeland has actually come. You see, Micah chapter 4 verse 1, there are two good news according to this reading in 1TG 25 page 4. Although the sad news is found in Micah 3 verse 12. But Micah chapter 4 verse 1, there are two good news. The first good news is that when God informed His people that someday they will return to the homeland, that is a good news to Judah. The Judah in the latter days, and I do fully believe that it is pointing to the generation in the days of Betty-Hotep, because Sister White has no knowledge concerning Micah chapter 4 verse 1. So, it is a joyful news. It encouraged them to serve God faithfully because there is a promise that someday they will return to the homeland. But the voice of inspiration says it is even more joyful at the time when God's people will be to learn that the actual time, the very year by which they will return to God and to the homeland has actually come. In answerer number 2, I would like to read. Here in answerer number 2, the shepherd's rod is plainly telling here, brothers and sisters, page 84 and page 85. Answerer number 2, pages 84 and page 85. Satan's constant target, the people's repeated stumbling block, that the great controversy between Christ and Satan is over this crowning hope, the kingdom, is seen from the Lord's repeated instructions in the prophecies, in the types, and in the parables, from Satan's constant effort to keep the human race out of it, and last, from the human beings repeatedly being defeated in their warfare to become heirs of it. Working determinedly from the beginning to plunge all humanity into hell, Satan conceived his major strategy of misleading them concerning the kingdom. He succeeded with most of the Jews because they wanted the kingdom set up before its appointed time. And the shepherd's rod says that in 1TG 15, page 20, it says, the Jews wanted a kingdom of their own, a kingdom of this world, saint and sinner in it. Yes, they wanted a kingdom on earth, but not in heaven. What is more, they wanted it 2,000 years ahead of schedule. So there is a schedule of that kingdom. And the Jewish people, they wanted that kingdom by 2,000 years ahead of schedule. Now let us read again the statement here in Answerer number 2, page 84. Working determinedly from the beginning to plunge all humanity into hell, Satan conceived his major strategy of misleading them concerning the kingdom. He succeeded with most of the Jews because they wanted the kingdom set up before its appointed time or not at all. And he is succeeding with many of the Laodiceans today because now, when the time appointed actually has come, they want to have it later or not at all. What a paradox! What an irony! Indeed, as history repeats itself, so does fully. So that's what happens, brothers and sisters. And hoping that we are among those people by which they will inherit the kingdom. And that is why the shepherd's rod says, brothers and sisters, the signs of the kingdom is even more important to observe than the signs of Christ's coming, mentioned in Revelation 6, verse 16 and 17. Or in other words, I would like to say these things. The most important at this time is to study the kingdom by which that kingdom is typifying the temple of Solomon that was built in Mount Moriah, rather than the kingdom typifying the temple that was built in Mount Zion. Although the shepherd's rod plainly told us in 2SR 262 that the glory of both is unsurpassable. It is unsurpassable, brothers and sisters. But for sure, if you will miss to be a part of that kingdom, to be built in Antitypical Mount Moriah, there is no possibility that you will become a part of that temple to be built in Mount Zion. Now let's go back to our subject concerning the beast, brothers and sisters. Let's read 2SR page 117, verse 9. Now let's read. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, all the heads being present on the beast, and the woman sitting on them proves that all 7 mountains must be in existence at the same time. They cannot be consecutive, for the woman sits on them all, which denotes one great union of the heads by the medium of the woman. They are called mountains, as God's denomination is called mountain in Isaiah 2 verse 2 and Micah 4 verse 1. The mountain singular is God's denomination, but the mountains plural by both Isaiah and Micah have reference to the same denominations represented by the heads on the beast. Thus the 7 heads are 7 mountains. Now, who are they? The denominations mentioned in Isaiah and all the mountains mentioned in Isaiah and the mountains mentioned in Micah. The shepherd's rod says in this reading that the mountains inscribed in plural form by both Isaiah and Micah have reference to the same denominations represented by the heads on the beast. Now, who are they? The 7 or the mountains in Micah chapter 4. The shepherd's rod made it so plain that whoever that mountains on Micah, that is the same mountains on the beast. Brothers and sisters, the 7 mountains, Revelation 7:17 verse 9, are the 7 heads. Now let us read 1SR. Then go back to that reading. 1SR page 242. 1SR 242. It says, coming back to Micah 6 verse 1. Hear ye now what the Lord saith. Note the verb here is in present tense, therefore present truth. But what are we to hear? Arise, contend thou before the mountains, and let the hills hear thy voice. The mountains means the same as in Micah 4 verse 1, first part. Now let us read Micah chapter 4 verse 1. Micah chapter 4 verse 1. It says, "But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it." Micah chapter 4 verse 1. So, concerning Micah chapter 4 verse 1, the first mention is singular, mountain. And the last that had been mentioned is plural, mountains and hills. Now let us read Micah chapter 6 verse 1. Micah chapter 6 verse 1. "Hear ye now what the Lord hath said. Arise, contend thou before the mountains, and let the hills hear thy voice." But in Micah chapter 6 verse 1, brothers and sisters, only mountains had been mentioned. And there is a divine command to someone to arise and contend thou before the mountains. Now let's go back to 1 SR 242. It says, brothers and sisters, coming back to Micah chapter 6 verse 1, "Hear ye now what the Lord saith." Note the verb here is in present tense, therefore present truth. But what are we to hear? "Arise, contend thou before the mountains, and let the hills hear thy voice." So, let us distinctly separate the people by which God commanded them to speak, so that the mountains and the hills shall hear their voice. The mountains means the same as in Micah 4 verse 1, first part. But if you will go to Micah chapter 4 verse 1, the first part that had been mentioned is mountains, singular. But what does it means? The mountains means the same as in Micah 4 verse 1, first part. Or in other words, brothers and sisters, the fulfillment of Micah chapter 4 verse 1 is divided into two sections. And then it says, the only difference between the two is that the latter is singular, but the former is plural. Now the shepherd's rod is plainly telling, brothers and sisters, concerning Micah chapter 4 verse 1, that the very first one that had been mentioned is singular, but the latter that had been mentioned is plural, mountains. Remember in Micah chapter 6 verse 1, there is no mountain that had been mentioned, but only mountains. Then it says, the mountain in chapter 4 means God's church denomination, as explained on page 173. But the mountains and hills, as in chapter 1 verse 1, last part. Now, look at the statement, brothers and sisters. The mountains means the same as in Micah 4 verse 1. First part, to repeat again, the first part mentioned in Micah chapter 4 verse 1, brothers and sisters, is mountain, not mountains. Now, what does it mean by the statement, the mountains means the same as in Micah chapter 4 verse 1, first part? So the first part mentioned here is pointing to Micah chapter 6 verse 1. To repeat, brothers and sisters, the phrase as in is, or the word as, it is an adverb. And comparing two objects, it says the mountains, that is in Micah chapter 6 verse 1, means the same as in Micah 4 verse 1, first part. It says the only difference between the two is that the latter is singular. So that it says the only difference between the two is that the latter is singular, but the former is plural. In which verse by which the latter is singular and the former is plural? Is it in Micah 4 verse 1? No, the former is singular and the latter is plural. Brothers and sisters, look at Micah chapter 4 verse 1. Now, how about Micah chapter 6 verse 1? Let us read the statement here. Verse 1. Hear ye now what the Lord saith. Arise, contend thou before the mountains, and let the hills hear thy voice. So the very first verse do not mention mountain, but only mountains and hills. Verse 2, Hear ye, O mountains, the Lord's controversy, and ye strong foundations of the earth. For the Lord hath a controversy with his people, and he will plead with Israel. Micah 6 verse 1 and verse 2. Now, in the book of Micah, on chapter 6, there is no mountain that had been mentioned, but only mountains and hills. Now, in Micah chapter 4, verse 1, Brothers and sisters, let us read. But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. So, the Bible is very plain. Micah chapter 4 verse 1. The first mention is singular, and the latter that had been mentioned is plural. But that is not the statement in the shepherd's rod. It says here, the mountains means the same as in Micah chapter 4 verse 1, first part. And then it says, the only difference between the two is that the latter is singular, but the former is plural. That statement cannot be applied to Micah chapter 4 verse 1 because the one that had been mentioned first is singular and not plural. And the latter that had been mentioned is plural and not singular. And then it says, the mountain in chapter 4 means God Church denomination as explained on page 173. But the mountains and hills as in chapter 4 verse 1, last part, so this statement is definitely applied to Micah chapter 4 verse 1, that the mountains and the hills is the last part, brothers and sisters, and that is plural, or the last part or the latter part. And in chapter 6 verse 1, being in plural would mean churches and organizations. In this sense, it could not refer to God's church, for he recognizes only one church as his. Also, the hills, being plural, would mean sect or minor movements, etc. So here the shepherd's rod plainly telling us that the hills represent minor movements, but the mountains must be the mainstream. 1SR page 242. Now this is the question. Which will come first? The woman sitting on the seven heads or the woman sitting on the beast? For sure, all of us will say, the woman sitting on the seven heads precede the woman sitting on the beast. Now, we already read in track number 12, page 32, that at the time when the woman is sitting on the beast, in that period of time, the 10 crown horns had been uncrowned. That is the period of time by which there is no more crown horns. And for sure, that description that the woman sitting on the beast is pointing to the commencement of the little time of trouble. Daniel chapter 12 verse 1, we call it time of trouble, but it is divided into two divisions. The little time of trouble and the great time of trouble. And we need to have a clear description in that two events. At the time when the woman is sitting on the scarlet colored beast, in the period of the little time of trouble, and in the time when the woman sitting on the scarlet colored beast in the period of the great time of trouble. There is a wide contrast between these two events, brothers and sisters, and we will show it one by one. Now, let us go back again, brothers and sisters. Here in 2SR, I would like to read the statement and then go back to Micah chapter 4. Here in 2SR, I would like to read page 100, 158, and also page 160. The woman sitting on the beast. So that is the statement. The woman sitting on the beast or sitting on the scarlet colored beast. Brothers and sisters. So I would like to read this reading. 2SR 158. While the revelator saw in vision the beast who bears the number 666 and the false prophet enforcing a false religion by law and miracles within the borders of the government represented by the two-horned beast, he was shown another interesting sight. So then it says, and I saw, he says, a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Revelation 17 verse 3 and 4. This symbol reveals that after the woman had sat on the heads, united the churches, she also succeeded to sit on the beast. The beast is a symbol of the entire present world, both civil 10 horns and religious 7 heads. As the woman sitting on the heads denotes union of churches, just so the sitting on the beast represents internationally the church and the state governed by the same head, woman. Therefore, an international system of religion and a combination of church and state. In such a system, the great men of earth will see a vision of settling the troubles of the world, wielding the people and the nations into a worldwide brotherhood, fulfilling by a medium of religion. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3. Now, let us read to us our page 160. To us our page 160. It says here, the tabulation of events in this chapter fully illustrate great prophetic occurrences that are to transpire in rapid succession as shown in the chart. The union of the churches represented by the woman sitting on the heads must take place before the combined power of the beast and the false prophet is fully realized. Now, I would like to read again. It says, the union of the churches represented by the woman sitting on the heads must take place before the combined power of the beast and the false prophet is fully realized. The symbols, false prophet and the beast, reveal that there shall be a national alliance of church and state. So the word national alliance meaning local, a local religio-political system. Now, I would like to read again in 2SR 151. It says, 2SR 151, the two-horned beast is the only one representing a local religio-political government. And in 2SR 160, it is called National Alliance of Church and State. The state is the President of the United States of America, and the church is represented by the false prophet. A union of church and state. Now, I would like to try to arrange the tabulation of events in its proper order, brothers and sisters. Now, as far as the Bible is thus concerned, according to the explanation given by the shepherd's rod, the woman will sit first the seven heads before the combined power of the beast and the false prophet are fully realized. So, the first event that we need to closely guard is the event when the woman sits on the seven heads. Is it still future or is it already fulfilling? That is very important, brothers and sisters, in this study concerning when the woman will sit on the seven heads. But the shepherd's rod made it so plain that that event will precede the event when the false prophet and the beast will combine their power. Here in track number 12, page 26, it says, the power that is represented by these two-horned beasts will identify itself with the false prophet, for together they are cast alive into a lake of fire. Revelation 19 verse 20. From this it is plain to see that the wonders which the beast does in the sight of men, and by which he deceives them that dwell on the earth, Revelation 13 verse 13 and 14, are wrought by the false prophet. Revelation 19 verse 20, in the sight of the beast. Clearly then, the beast's Sibyl's authority combined with the prophet's supernatural power points to a union of beast and prophet, an affiliation of state and of church representatives. Track number 12, page 26. Now, let us read another statement on the Shepherd's Rod Publications. Old Symbolic Code. One Symbolic Code, number 5, page 6. One Symbolic Code, number 5, page 6. Let us read. The questioner, let us read first the question. If the Seventh-day Adventist denomination is one of the seven heads of the beast, then how can the woman of Revelation 17 sit on the seven heads? One of them being the Seventh-day Adventist, after the purification, at which time the church will be composed of pure members only. The questioner will note that there are two beasts with seven heads, one in Revelation 13 and the other in Revelation 17. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is symbolized by one of the heads on the former beast, or the leopard-like beast. The woman sits on the seven heads of the latter beast, which has nothing to do with the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, and which finds its fulfillment in the period after the purification of the church. Hence, the woman is not sitting on the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but rather on the Protestant churches who have become Babylon. But I would like to focus to the reading that the woman will sit on the seven heads, it says, finds its fulfillment in the period after the purification of the church. One symbolic code, number 5, page 6. Now concentrate on that statement. The woman will sit on the seven heads after the purification of the church. Does the purification of the church mentioned there is the slaughtering? Now, if we will be saying the slaughtering, the 7 days slaughtering, that occurrence will be fulfilled after the little time of trouble. Are we saying, brothers and sisters, that even during the little time of trouble, the woman did not as yet sit on the seven heads? It is contrary to the prophecy, because at the commencement of the little time of trouble, the woman is sitting on the beast rather than on the seven heads. And the sitting on the seven heads precedes the sitting on the beast. So the purification of the church, brothers and sisters, cannot be mean always to indicate the 7 days slaughtering. So we need to focus our attention to that statement, purification of the church. Now, let us study closely now this prophetic event, brothers and sisters. We already read that according to the shepherd's rod, brothers and sisters, that the kingdom stone, or the stone kingdom, in Daniel 2, verse 34, and Daniel 2, verse 44, first it says, it will be set up by God, Jesus Christ, in the time when the 10 horns are still crowns. But at the time when the woman rides the scarlet-colored beast, the 10 horns, the 10 crown horns of the leopard-like beast were already uncrowned. That is the period of time by which there are no crown kings, according to tract number 12 on page 32. That would be, brothers and sisters, pertaining to the time when the little time of trouble begins. Now, here's another statement that I would like to read, brethren, in 2SR. 2SR page 122. It says, therefore, her first achievement, sitting on the waters, that is Revelation 17:15, must have been in the past from the time the prophetic symbol is revealed. Hence, the sitting on the heads becomes her second accomplishment, and the sitting on the beast is the last, at which time she is judged. When does the period of time by which the woman is sitting on the beast? That is the time by which she is judged. Now, let us read another statement here in 2SR page 121. So, we need to study closely, brothers and sisters. To repeat again, the prominent event that we need to guard at this present time is the fulfillment of that prophetic event when the woman will sit on the 7 heads. Now, how about this reading in 1SR 214? The prophecy of Revelation 13 verse 3, it says, so the prophecy in Revelation 13 on verse 3, and the world wandered after the beast, reveals a great apostasy. The biblical number 7 includes everything represented by the heads, riding on the beast and headed by the devil. Remember, the focal point here is Revelation 13 verse 3. What beast mentioned here? Riding on the beast and headed by the devil. Of course, that is concerning the red dragon. Note, the name of blasphemy is upon all 7 heads, symbol of impious religious leaders, mocking the personality or authority of God under the cloak of Christianity. We will go back to this reading in 1SR 214, and we need to study closely what beast mentioned here. It says, riding on the beast and headed by the devil. But the quotation is Revelation 13 verse 3. Now, let us read 2SR 121 to find out the events by which it says in 2SR 122, the sitting on the beast is the last, at which time she is judged. Now here in 2SR page 121, it says, "And there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters." The angel that was talking to John is one of the 7 which had the 7 vials of the 7 last plagues. Revelation 15:7 and 16:1. It will be noticed that he had the vial of the plague ready, but it had not been poured out. At the time he said to John, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore. By the information given, it is certain that the event predicted by the symbol, the woman sitting on the beast, is shortly before the plagues are poured out and in the time when the woman is to be judged. So, the statement says, brothers and sisters, that at the time when the angel was talking to John, the 7 angels had already the 7 vials of the 7 last plagues. Now, if we will apply it to 96 AD or even 98 AD, that is the period of time by which the angel is talking with John. Because after 98 AD, John returned to Ephesus, from Patmos to Ephesus. So, if we will apply it in the days of John the Beloved, when the angel is talking with John, are we saying that the 7 angels had already the 7 vials? Now, let us go to track number 5. In track number 5, on page 116 and 117, it says, Consequently, the fulfillment of the prophetic statement, the temple of God was open in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, Revelation 11 verse 19, will, just as it was in the beginning of the judgment, be realized after the judgment is finished, that is, after the close of provision, when the door of the temple is open. And after the judicial tribunal leaves the temple, one of the 4 beasts will give unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, Revelation 15 verse 7, and the temple will be filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no man will be able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels are fulfilled, Revelation 15 verse 8. Now, the Bible is very plain in Revelation 15 verse 7 that the 7 angels could never have the 7 vials, not until one of the 4 beasts will give to the 7 angels the 7 vials. Or in other words, the Bible is very plain in Revelation 15 verse 7. It is one of the 4 beasts. Although it did not flatly say who among the 4 beasts, brothers and sisters, but for sure, one of the 4 beasts, he is the one that had been commanded by God, or the 7 vials from the hand of God, handed to one of the 4 beasts, and that one of the 4 beasts, he will be the one to give the 7 vials to the 7 angels. But when that prophetic event by which one of the 4 beasts will give the 7 vials to the 7 angels, it says, after the judicial tribunal leaves the temple. This is very plain here in track number 5, 117. And after the judicial tribunal leaves the temple, one of the 4 beasts will give unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God. So that statement, brothers and sisters, we can easily understood, brothers and sisters, that this is only a vision in the days of John the Beloved, not the actual fulfillment of the prophecy. The same with the statement in 2 TJ number 12, page 29. I would like to quote again that statement. It says, John truly penned it as a prophecy. But when it actually takes place, then God's agency on earth, the spirit of prophecy in the church, is to proclaim that the event has actually taken place. 2 TJ 12:29. When John wrote it, no, it is only a prophecy. Therefore, in the perfect fulfillment of the prophecy, this John must be antitypical John the Beloved. And that is why, in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, let's go back to Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. It says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him. For sure, the pronoun him is pointing to John the Beloved. To show unto his servants. Why is it that it was inscribed in plural form? Servants. This is pointing to antitypical John. And who are they, the antitypical John, being inscribed in plural form? It must be to all God's servants from 1844 onwards, by which God bestowed unto them understanding concerning the book of Revelation. Because according to the Shepherd's Rod in 2SR 191, the word hereafter is pointing to 1844. So, being inscribed in plural form, to show unto his servants, meaning God commanded John the Revelator, just wrote the vision. It is not for you to understand the vision that you have written. I will show unto my servants in the last days concerning your vision. And the same with the book of Daniel. The opening of that book being sealed point to 1844. 3 symbolic code 8 to 10 page 8. It says that in more specific terms began in the year 1844. 3 symbolic code 8 to 10 page 8. Now let us go back again the reading in 2SR 121 and ponder deeply. It says, and there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, meaning the 7 angels had already the 7 vials, and talk with me, saying unto me, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Verse 1, the angel that was talking to John is one of the 7 which had the 7 vials of the 7 last plagues. So the 7 angels had already the 7 vials when one of that angel is talking to John. But it could not be the literal John, the ancient John the Beloved. Otherwise, we'll be saying that at that time, the judicial tribunal leaves the temple, because that is the time when one of the 4 beasts will give the 7 vials to the 7 angels. And at the time when this angel, one of the 7 angels, at the time that he is talking to John, they had already the 7 vials. Or in other words, indicating that at the time when this angel is communicating to that antitypical John, they already received the 7 vials given to them by one of the 4 beasts. But when? After the judicial tribunal leaves the temple. Now, tell me, there is no dispute to the fact that the judicial tribunal will leave the temple at the general clause of provision. Are we saying that this paragraph be applied to the general clause of provision? That is the time that God will reveal, brothers and sisters, to God's servant concerning the woman in the beast, the scarlet-colored beast? And secondly, in 2SR 122, I would like to read again the statement. 2SR 122, it says, therefore, her first achievement is sitting on the waters, must have been in the past from the time the prophetic symbol is revealed. Hence, the sitting on the heads becomes her second accomplishment, and the sitting on the beast is the last, at which time she is judged. At the time when she is judged, that is the time that the woman is sitting on the beast. Now, if it is the general clause of provision, is it the time that the woman is sitting on the beast? I think it is opposite, because at that time, the message says Babylon is fallen. We know that that is a figurative speech, meaning she was fallen on riding the beast. So, let us study closely this reading in 2SR page 121. Now, let us read again, brothers and sisters, the statement. 2SR page 121. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials. So the 7 angels already had the 7 vials, but only one of them came to John. It says, talk with me, saying unto me, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Verse 1. The angel that was talking to John is one of the 7 which had the 7 vials of the 7 last plagues. See Revelation 15 verse 7 and Revelation 16 verse 1. It will be noticed that he had the vial of the plague ready, but it had not been poured out at the time he said to John, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore. By the information given, it is certain that the event predicted by the symbols, the woman sitting on the beast, is shortly before the plagues are poured out and in the time when the woman is to be judged. Now, I would like to read 1 TG, brothers and sisters, so that we could be able to understand that passage. Let us go to 1 TG. 1 TG number 12 on page 24. It says, "It is plain, moreover, that all the saints are called to get out of Babylon before the plagues of Revelation 16 fall upon her, if they are to be delivered from them. But how can Zion deliver herself if she does not hear the Lord's warnings to leave Babylon? It is therefore very urgent that this message reach her ears." Who is the Zion mentioned here, by which the message is to leave Babylon, so that she will not be partakers of the plagues to be poured out upon Babylon? Think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. Does the word Zion can be applied to Sunday keepers? I think the statement in 1TG number 3 on page 12, it says, "The angel have charge of the city, Jerusalem, not of the world and not of Babylon." Even an altogether uninformed Christian knows that the terms Jerusalem, Judah, and Israel mean the church. It says never even as much as imply the world. They have always meant the church and always will mean the church, for that is what they are. 1TG number 3, page 12. So for sure, brothers and sisters, Zion and Jerusalem, Israel, Judah can never be applied to the world. Or in other words, it can never be applied to Sunday keepers. But who are they Zion mentioned in this reading in 1TG 12:24? To get out of Babylon. For sure, it could not be the 144,000 living saints, because they will not be taken from Babylon, but rather from Egypt. The message to the 144,000 living saints is to get out of Egypt, not to get out of Babylon. But the shepherd's rod made it so plain that there must be a message to be proclaimed to Zion, and she need to depart from Babylon, brothers and sisters, before the plagues will be poured out. Now the question is that, is these plagues pointing to the 7 literal plagues? Think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. I would like to read the statement in 2TG 43, page 28. Here you see that not only will God cleanse His church, Judah and Israel, so it points out to the spiritual Israel, the 12 tribes, by taking away all those who pollute His house of prayer, but that afterwards He will gather into His purified church all the dispersed who have descended from both the kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes, and of the kingdom of Judah, the 2 tribes, all who are now out among the nations, not in the church of the Laodiceans. He will make them one nation. 2TG 43, page 24. 2TG 43, page 24. Now, the shepherd's rod made it so plain. There are 12 tribes. The 12 tribes is spiritual Israel, and the 12 tribes literal Israel. The 12 tribes literal Israel, that is the type, and the 12 tribes spiritual Israel, that is the antitype. Now, I would like to read here in 2TG number 4, page 14. 2TG number 4, page 14. Here we are plainly told that the 2 ancient kingdoms, the types, He is to restore and join and so bring out the antitype. And it is very plain in track number 9, right? Now, let us go to track number 9. Here in track number 9 on page 56, to gather a class defiled with women, as Psychon puts. This class of saints must be those who have at one time been married to some unchristian mistress, a heathen church, and who consequently are not descendants of either Jacob or the Christian church. So there are to be 2 harvests, one from the church and one from the world. The record of the former mentions only Israelites, the 144,000, those not defiled with women, though it does not say that there might not be others, while the record of the latter, however, definitely embraces a great multitude from all nations, which must necessarily be both undefiled and defiled ones, Jews and Gentiles. So the great multitudes is composed of defiled and undefiled. And for sure, the undefiled ones is pointing to the literal 12 tribes. Now, here in track number 3, on page 72. It says, and the second fruits, and the second gives the second fruits, the great multitude from all nations, some of whom also may be undefiled with women, hidden churches. And that is the 12 tribes. They were undefiled with women. Now here's another statement that I would like to read, brothers and sisters. Track number 8 on page 16, and also track number 8, page 12. It says, track number 8, page 16. This illustrated prophecy scarcely needs to be interpreted, as it is virtually self-explanatory, showing that the two ancient kingdoms, Judah and Israel, will yet be gathered from among the heathen. The heathen mentioned here is Babylon, among whom they have long been scattered, and that they will become again one great nation, a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Daniel 2 verse 44. Now here in tract number 8, page 12, it says, hearing Christ's teachings, then rejecting them and crucifying him, the Jewish nation brought upon their heads the doom which God pronounced upon them when through his prophet he declared, ye are not my people, and I will not be your God, though at the same time in his great mercy he let the promise be written in that place where it was said unto them, ancient Israel, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ancient Israel, ye are the sons of the living God. See Romans 9 verse 24 to verse 26. Who is the main subject? In Romans 9 verse 24 to 26, both pointing to ancient Judah and ancient Israel. The voice of inspiration made it so plain, brothers and sisters, that at the second fruits, it is composed of defiled and undefiled. Tract number 3, page 72. And it was answered in tract number 9, page 56. The undefiled one are the literal 12 tribes. That is very plain, brothers and sisters. And we need to study closely this very wonderful prophecy, because we are coming face to face those predicted events. The ingathering, both the spiritual Israel, the antitype, and the literal Israel, the type. I would like to read this reading, brothers and sisters. First in tract number 15, page 63. The theory that the living saints at the coming of the Lord are only 144,000 in number is discredited, in that it leaves no chance for even one person to be saved from a nation other than the descendants of Jacob. Not even from the descendants of Abraham, saved through Jacob himself. Moreover, the theory makes the term first fruits a vain thing, because it does not advocate second fruits. Now, we need to understand first that Isaac, he has no blood cometh from Abraham. He is a miracle child. The only blood that goes into the body of Isaac is the blood of Sarah, not from Abraham. The only son by which we can say descendants of Abraham must be in the blood of Ishmael, because that is the only son by which Abraham has his own blood, not with Isaac. Now, I would like to read to you here, and I think it is the writings of A.J. Wagoner, The Sermons on Romans. I would like to read by A.J. Wagoner. The promise to Abraham depended upon one thing, his having a son. So I would like to read this reading. The promise to Abraham depended upon one thing, his having a son. 25 years elapsed from the time the promise was made until it was fulfilled. So at that time, Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90 years old. Brothers and sisters, the promise was given at the time when Abraham was 75 years old and Sarah is 65 years old. But 25 years elapsed from the time the promise was made until it was fulfilled. Abraham staggered not at the promise of God, but Sarai did. And Abraham hearkened unto the voice of Sarai. She undertook to help the Lord to carry out his plan. But Agar was a slave, and her child could be nothing but a slave born after the flesh. So who are they born after the flesh? That is Ishmael. Let us distinctly separate the literal seed and the allegory. The literal seed by which born after the flesh, that is the descendants of Ishmael. But in allegory, the born after the flesh is pointing to the Jewish people, the descendants in the lineage of Isaac. And it says here, the seed promised Abraham were to be free men, not slaves. Therefore, nothing was gained by this plan of Sarai. The time came when Sarai realized that the only thing for her to do was to believe that God was able to carry out His promise without her help. Then through faith, she received strength to conceive seed. The birth of Isaac was a miracle. From a human standpoint, it was utterly impossible for Abraham and Sarai to become the parents of a child. She conceived by the power of God. Abraham and Sarai did nothing to gain the promise. They did nothing to gain the promise except to believe, and yet the child of the promise was their own child. So with Christians, nothing can be done to gain the righteousness of Christ, save only to believe the promises. It is wrong to put forth efforts to secure the righteousness of Christ. We are told to believe the promises. God has promised to make us righteous, and the only way to obtain that righteousness is to believe that God is able to input it. But what I'm trying to emphasize in this reading, brothers and sisters, no, Isaac, there is no blood that cometh from Abraham. The same with Jesus Christ. Because Isaac is typifying Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, at His first advent, there was no blood coming from Joseph, the husband of Mary. The only blood that runs to Jesus Christ is the blood of Mary. The same with Isaac, only the blood of Sarai, not from Abraham. Now, the voice of inspiration, brothers and sisters, are plainly telling that the 144,000 are called the descendants of Jacob, and they are not descendants from Abraham. Let us read again the statement in tract number 15 on page 63. It says, the theory that the living saints at the coming of the Lord are only 144,000 in number is discredited in that it leaves no chance for even one person to be saved from a nation other than the descendants of Jacob, not even from the descendants of Abraham, saved through Jacob himself. So here the shepherd's rod says that if the living saints are only 144,000 spiritual Israel, then there is not even one living saint from the descendants of Abraham. So that statement plainly indicating, brothers and sisters, that the 144,000 living saints, they are not the descendants of Abraham, but they are descendants of Jacob. Brothers and sisters, although let us distinctly separate the descendants of Isaac, because if you will say descendants of Isaac, Esau is descended from Isaac, but the 144,000 are not Esauites. So it must be specifically to point descendants of Jacob, not descendants from Isaac, because Esau is also descendants from Isaac. Or the shepherd's rod is very specific by saying descendants of Jacob. It is high time now, brothers and sisters, to apply all the statements in the Bible for prophecy and the shepherd's rod in its proper setting and think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. Thus, the leadership in the Seventh-day Adventist Church at this present time we call Jacobites or Esauites. If in the days of Binti Houghton in 1930, I would like to read 12 symbolic code. 12 symbolic code number 5, page 18. But the Jacobites are not yet on Mount Zion with the Lamb. Instead, they are in Antitypical Padam Aram, where God is sustaining them apart from the Esauites in the church. That is why one part of the Adventists are in Washington, D.C., and other part is in Texas. They are unable to get along together. So look at the statement, brothers and sisters. The Esauites, brothers and sisters, let us distinctly separate the Esauites and the Jacobites. Now, for sure, brothers and sisters, the literal 12 tribes in this study must be among the descendants of Abraham. Apostle Paul, in the book of Romans chapter 9, on verse 6, not as though the word of God hath taken none effect, for they are not all Israel which are of Israel. It says, for they are not all Israel which are of Israel. Neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. That is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted for the seed. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters. Let us distinctly separate the children of promise and the children of the flesh. Now, the only children of promise is Isaac. And Isaac typified Jesus Christ, according to Galatians 3 verse 16, as explained by Apostle Paul. But what I'm trying to emphasize at this time is concerning the literal 12 tribes by which they are the constituent of the great multitude which no man could number, by which they are classified as undefiled with women. Undefiled with women, brothers and sisters. The literal 12 tribes, undefiled with women, according to track number 956 and track number 3, page 72. No, they are not the identified Jews of today, brothers and sisters. And I would like to read first track number 5. Here in track number 5, page 110 and 111. It says, "But why leave out the court? Why not measure it also? For since it is a part of the building, it too must be symbolical of saints. Obviously, because it represents the great multitude which no man could number," meaning measure, "of all nations and kindreds and peoples and tongues." Revelation 7 verse 9. "The last who come from among the Gentiles." The court, in other words, is symbolical of the immeasurable, innumerable harvest of the second fruits, brought in after the measurable, numerable harvest of first fruits, the 144,000. It is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bad to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, Daniel 8 verse 14, after the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good in the church, as illustrated by the parable of the net, Matthew 13 verse 47 and 48. They are those who by name my people are called to come out of Babylon, and who, with no unclean among them, Isaiah 52 verse 1, come into the already purified and living church of God. Now, first of all, the quotation here is Isaiah 52 verse 1. Isaiah 52 verse 1 cannot be applied to the world because the focal point on that verse is Jerusalem. Awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion, put on thy strength, O Jerusalem. And we already read in 1 Timothy 3, page 12, the term Zion, Jerusalem, Judah, Israel can never be applied to the world. But this statement is very plain, brothers and sisters. Who are they? By which, by name, they are called my people. The answer is found in track number 4. Let's read track number 4, page 12. Track number 4, page 12. The same pair of children introduced in the first chapter of the vision are in the second chapter denominated, the difference being that from both names is dropped the prefix lo, which in the Hebrew means no. Accordingly, whereas lo ruhama means no mercy, and lo amay, not my people, ruhama means mercy, and amay, my people. So what is that name? My people, point to amay. And that is pointing to the rejection of the Jewish or the 12 tribes, brothers and sisters, in 34 AD, when it says, Lu amay, meaning, ye are no longer my people. But it was predicted beforehand in track number 8, brothers and sisters, we already read that accordingly, in page 12, it says, hearing Christ's teachings, then rejecting them and crucifying him, the Jewish nation brought upon their heads the doom which God pronounced upon them when through his prophet he declared, ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. Though at the same time, in his great mercy, he let the promise be written in the place where it was said unto them, ancient Israel, ye are not my people, meaning, Lu amay, there it shall be said unto them, ancient Israel, ye are the sons of the living God. Amay. Lu amay is the rejection, amay is the reacceptance. And the shepherd's rod made it so plain that that is the very first constituent of the great multitude. The 12 tribes, the literal 12 tribes. We already read, right? 2 TG 43, page 24. The very first one to be gathered among the constituents of the great multitude must be the literal 12 tribes. And it is called the Antitypical Psychon Exodus. Because the first typical Exodus, going out of Egypt, pointing to the 144,000 spiritual Israel. And then the second Exodus, going out of Babylon in the days of Zechariah and Haggai. All of them are Sabbath keepers. And here in 1TG number 11, I would like to read. 1TG number 11. On page 3, it says, in our last Sabbath study, we learned that the prophecy of Zechariah is applicable to two peoples at two different times. First to the Jews while they were returning from Babylon to Jerusalem, and second to those who in the time of the end are to come out of all nations. Revelation 7 verse 9 and Revelation 18:4. We also learn that the revival and reformation which took place in Zechariah's day is a type of a revival and reformation that is to take place in our day, and that the peoples returning anciently from Babylon is a type of the people returning from the latter day Babylon. Revelation 18 verse 4. And I think that is perfectly typifying as the antitypical Enoch. Brothers and sisters, because Enoch was not an Israelite, but Enoch is a Sabbath keeper. Now, I would like to read Patriarchs and Prophets. Here in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 89, it says, then as in the world before the flood of water, but there is a flood of fire, because it is type and antitype. Let us distinctly separate the flood of water and the flood of fire. But it is not the lake of fire. We will deal that on the subject, the seven trumpets. Then as in the world before the flood, iniquity will prevail, following the promptings of their corrupt hearts and the teachings of a deceptive philosophy. Men will rebel against the authority of heaven. But like Enoch, God's people will seek for purity of heart and conformity to His will until they shall reflect the likeness of Christ. Like Enoch, they will warn the world of the Lord's second coming, and of the righteous to be visited upon transgression, and of the judgment to be visited upon transgression. And by their holy conversation and example, they will condemn the sins of the ungodly. As Enoch was translated to heaven before the destruction of the world by water, so the living righteous will be translated from the earth before its destruction by fire. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 89. And for sure, all of us will agree that Enoch was a Sabbath keeper. So it is even more exactly fits to the constituent of the great multitude by which they were Sabbath keepers. There are many Sabbath keepers not under the banner of the third angel's message, brothers and sisters. But for sure, the literal 12 tribes must be pointing to the Sabbath keepers by which they were Christians, not to the unbelieving Jews who don't believe Jesus Christ. But the focal point of our study in this subject is that the commencement of the loud cry of the third angel's message to the constituent of the great multitude, according to track number 5, 110 and 111. I would like to read again the statement. Track number 5, 110 and 111, it says, because it represents those among whom there are no bad to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, Daniel 8 verse 14, after the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good, brothers and sisters. So there are three prominent events mentioned here. After the cleansing of the heavenly temple, after the judgment of the dead, and after the separation of the bad from among the good. That is the commencement of the loud cry of the third angel's message, by which the very first constituent of the great multitude, which no man could number, must be referring to all Sabbath keepers not under the banner of the third angel's message. There are many of them, brothers and sisters. The mere fact that at the commencement of the little time of trouble, the message is addressed to the non-Sabbath keepers, plainly indicating that, brothers and sisters, the message that will be proclaimed to all Sabbath keepers not under the banner of the third angel's message must be proclaimed prior to the commencement of the little time of trouble. And that is during the Great Tribulation. Let us distinctly separate the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24, verse 21. That is during the Dark Ages, 538 to 1798. And the Great Tribulation in Revelation 7, verse 14. Brothers and sisters, Revelation 7, verse 14. Right? Let us read the Bible. And for sure, the question raised by John is pointing to the great multitude, which no man could number. Let's read Revelation 7, verse 13. It says, And one of the elders answered, saying unto me, What are these which are arrayed in white robes? And whence came they? Verse 14, And I said unto him, Sir, thou knowest. And he said to me, These are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So the great multitude which came out the great tribulation, not all of them will came out in the great tribulation in reality. The only constituent of the great multitude will came out in the great tribulation are the Sabbath keepers. And all others, brothers and sisters, they will be converted during the time of trouble and not during the great tribulation. Now, I would like to read here in 2SR 166, it says, 2SR page 166, Therefore, this great multitude is gathered from all nations, after the closing work for the church, and in the time of the great harvest. The palms in their hands signify victory over the beast and his image, death and the grave. One of the elders before the throne said of them, These are they which came out of great tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. 2SR page 166. Now let us distinctly separate the Jacob's trouble during the great tribulation and the Jacob's trouble in the little time of trouble. For example, here in 2SR page 163, we quote from the writings of the Spirit of Prophecy, This was the time of Jacob's trouble. Then all the saints cried out with anguish of spirit and were delivered by the voice of God. The 144,000 triumphed. Their faces were lighted up with the glory of God. Life Sketches, page 117. Note that the 144,000 in number were present in the time of Jacob's trouble. According to the following quotation, the time of trouble commences immediately after the close of provision. When Christ shall cease his work as mediator in man's behalf, then the time of trouble will begin. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 201. That time of trouble is before any of the sleeping saints are resurrected. Therefore, the 144,000 are not resurrected but are living saints who have never tasted death and are to be translated at the second coming of Christ. 2SR 163. Let us distinctly separate this Jacob's trouble, because this is the Jacob's trouble in the period of the little time of trouble, and the Jacob's trouble in the period of the great tribulation, the one we read in 2SR page 166. Now, let us distinctly separate the great tribulation in Matthew 24, because that is already in the past. But the great tribulation in Revelation 7:14 was still unfulfilled. But the occurrence is the same. During the great tribulation, during the dark ages, the saints were martyred for their faith during the great tribulation. That is also called the evil time, mentioned in Isaiah 57:1. That is the fulfillment, brothers and sisters, that many of the saints will be martyred for their faith. Now let me read to you here in 3SM on page 397 and 398. Persecution in the battle before the last closing conflict. The two armies will stand distinct and separate, and this distinction will be so marked that many who shall be convinced of the truth will come on the side of God's commandment-keeping people. When this grand work is to take place in the battle, prior to the last closing conflict, many will be imprisoned, many will flee for their lives from cities and towns, and many will be martyrs for Christ's sake in standing in defense of the truth. 3SM page 397 and 398, brothers and sisters. And it could not be applied to the commencement of the little time of trouble, because at the commencement of the little time of trouble, there will be no more saint to die. Now let us read 2SR. Here in 2SR, on page 173, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works do follow them. Revelation 14:13. Which die from henceforth, that is, from the commencement of the loud cry. Thus the word declares that some of the saints will be laid in their grave even during the time of the harvest, the loud cry. We quote from the Counsels on Health, page 375, many will be laid away to sleep before the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble shall come upon the world. In 1SR 219, it says, They had upon their foreheads the seal of the living God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Note that after the sealing of the 144,000, there will be some who would die in the Lord saved. For the scripture reads, From henceforth, meaning from the time this company was sealed. So this is very plain, brothers and sisters. During the loud cry of the third angel's message, in that proclamation of the message, there are still saints to die. And they are martyrs. The fulfillment of 3SM page 397 and 398. And that is Revelation 6. Let's go back again. Revelation chapter 6. Although we have a separate subject concerning the seven seals, but let's read Revelation chapter 6, verse 9. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. Revelation 6, verse 9, 10, and 11. These three verses, as long as the prophecy is thus concerned, it points out to the three periods of martyrdom in the three periods of the exceeding great horn. Because the treading of the host is the massacring of the Christians. According to track number 3 on page 39. Let us read track number 3, page 39. The treading of the host is the massacring of the Christians who would not worship according to the dictates of the horn power. But the horn power is divided into three periods: pagan, papal, and then the Protestant period. So the souls under the altar in Revelation 6 verse 9, pointing to the martyrs died during the reign of pagan Rome, and more particularly in the days of Nero. Here in the Great Controversy, page 40, it says here, the Great Controversy, page 40, these persecutions beginning under Nero about the time of the martyrdom of Paul continued with greater or less purity for centuries. Christians were falsely accused of the most dreadful crimes and declared to be the cause of great calamities, famine, pestilence, and earthquakes. As they become the objects of popular hatred and suspicion, informers stood ready for the sake of gain to betray the innocent. They were condemned as rebels against the empire, as foes of religion, and peace to society. Great numbers were thrown down to wild beasts or burned alive in the amphitheaters. Some were crucified. Others were covered with the skins of wild animals and thrust into the arena to be turned by dogs. Their punishment was often made the chief entertainment at public feasts. Vast multitudes assembled to join the sight and greeted their dying agonies with laughter and applause. The Great Controversy, page 40. And that is the martyrdom in the first period of the exceeding great horn pagan Rome, brothers and sisters, and there were the souls under the altar. The second martyrdom is during the second period of the exceeding great horn, during papacy, the Dark Ages, 538 to 1798, and they were called the fellow servants. But the last and the final martyrdom is during the time when that predicted precedent, the mystical number 666, as stated in 151 and also in 3SM 397 and 398. They are those who have been predicted beforehand that who will die, Revelation 14:13. And that is after the sealing of the 144,000. And that is during the Great Tribulation. And that is why the difference between the time of trouble and the Great Tribulation is that during the Great Tribulation, there are still saints to die. Whereas in the little time of trouble, there will be no more saint to die, brothers and sisters. I would like to read answer number 4, page 6. It says, prophesying of the Great Tribulation, Christ forewarned that it would be a time of persecution, privation, and death to the saints, and that they should therefore flee into the mountains to save their lives, lest there should be no flesh be saved. The same description in 3SM 397 or 398. In track 15, page 60, it says, track number 15 on page 60. Let me read to you the statement. The difference between the Great Tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, Matthew 24:21, and the time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, is that during the Great Tribulation, the saints are slain, whereas during the time of trouble, they are delivered. Track number 15, page 60. But the statement we read in 2SR 173, quoting Counsels on Hell 375, that the saints who died after the 144,000 are completely sealed during the loud cry of the third angel's message to the great multitude. There are those who will die in Revelation 14:13, and it says, God laid them down to sleep before the fiery ordeal of the little time of trouble. Then we can easily discern that Revelation 14:13 will be fulfilled prior to the time of trouble. Because in the time of trouble, the balance, it says here in 1SR 219, I would like to read. 1SR 219. Those who cannot undergo the trial are laid in their graves, while 144,000 remain and will escape. But the balance in the church shall perish in the ruin. May God help His people. So the word now is applied to the commencement of the time of trouble, that the balance or the remaining Sabbath keepers at the commencement of the little time of trouble are only living saints and living wicked. And the living wicked will perish. All the saints who are destined for grave and resurrection, all of them are laid down to sleep prior to the commencement of the time of trouble, according to Counsels on Hell, page 375. So the commencement, brothers and sisters, of the loud cry to the great multitude, which no man could number, first address to all Sabbath keepers, and they will be converted during the Great Tribulation. And the Great Tribulation commenced after the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary, and after the judgment of the dead, and after the church is purified. According to track number 5, 110 and 111. Why is it that it is very necessary to connect that subject when we are studying the beast study? The beast revelation, to repeat again, cometh from God, brothers and sisters. And it is a revelation to unmask all the deceptions of Satan, to uncover the traps of the devil. Now, let us study closely that prominent event recorded in Revelation 13 that we could not buy and sell, brothers and sisters. When would that predicted event will be fulfilled? Is it during the little time of trouble? Is it during the Great Tribulation? Or is it prior with both events? Now, at the time when God's people could not buy and sell, what is our faith, brothers and sisters? Or what is our situation at that time? Well, our God leaves us in hunger. We could no longer buy, and we could no longer sell. I would like to read verse here in Early Writings on page 56. It says, duty in view of the time of trouble. The Lord has shown me repeatedly that it is contrary to the Bible to make any provision for our temporal wants in the time of trouble. I saw that if the saints had food laid up by them or in the field in the time of trouble, when sword, famine, and pestilence are in the land, it should be taken from them by violent hands, and strangers would reap their fields. Then will be the time for us to trust wholly in God, and He will sustain us. I saw that our bread and water will be sure at that time, and that we shall not lack or suffer hunger, for God is able to spread a table for us in the wilderness. If necessary, He would send ravens to feed us, as He did to feed Elijah, or rain manna from heaven, as He did for the Israelites. Early Writings, page 56. Now, let us go back again to our reading, brothers and sisters, concerning the woman will sit on the 7 heads. We already read, brothers and sisters, that the sitting of the woman on the 7 heads precedes the sitting of the woman on the beast, on the scarlet-colored beast. The sitting on the 7 heads, or the sitting of the woman on the 7 heads, precedes the time when the beast and the post-prophet will be combined, according to our reading in 2SR 160. And also in 2SR page 158, it says here in 2SR 158, preliminary to that miracle working power, Protestantism, Catholicism, and spiritualism will have grasped each other's hand by means of church federation. The difference of opinion in doctrinal points will be considered of no vital importance to salvation. Why is it then the doctrinal points will no longer be considered as vital importance to salvation? There must be a happenstance that all of them will be obliged to unite together as one, all Christians, brothers and sisters. And always reminds me the statement, current events that may fulfill prophecy. Right? In track number 12. Current events that may fulfill prophecy. Track number 12, page 53. So, it says current events that may fulfill prophecy. Now, what is the current events today? If you will open although here in our congregation, we are no longer watching television, but I do not know in the other countries. We're only looking the news in internet. But whether television or internet, at the time that you will open, the only prevailing news is concerning the coronavirus. Would you think these occurrences is not a sign of the fulfillment of the prophecy? We need to study closely, brothers and sisters. To repeat again, I would like to read again the statement, the prediction given by Sister White in the Great Controversy. Let us read on 588 and 589. I would like to read this reading. While appearing to the children of men as a great physician who can heal all their maladies, He will bring disease and disaster until populous cities are reduced to ruin and desolation. Even now, He is at work in accidents and calamities by sea and by land, in great conflagrations, in first tornadoes and terrible hailstorms, in tempests, floods, cyclones, tidal waves, and earthquakes in every place and in 1,000 forms. Satan is exercising his power. But the thing is that, if you study the Bible as per prophecy, Satan cannot exercise his power unless it will be allowed by God. And the only reason that God allowed Satan to exercise his power, because the predicted time, you remember the predicted event in 2 Thessalonians, here in Great Controversy 390, it says, the Bible declares that before the coming of the Lord, Satan will work with all power and signs and lying wonders, with all deceivableness of unrighteousness. And they that receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved, will be left to receive strong delusion that they should believe a lie. Not until this condition shall be reached, and the union of the church with the world shall be fully accomplished throughout Christendom, will the fall of Babylon be complete. The change is a progressive one, and the perfect fulfillment of Revelation 14 verse 8 is yet future. What is the lie mentioned here? Which is a strong delusion that those who do not fall in love with the present truth, that they should believe a lie. What is the lie? The miracles. The working miracles. Now, let us continue reading in the Great Controversy. It says, Satan is exercising his power. He sweeps away the ripening harvest, and famine and distress follow. He imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish by the pestilence. These visitations are to become more and more frequent and disastrous. Destruction will be upon both men and beasts. Now tell me, this prediction of Sister White, would you think it is not what happening throughout the whole world today? That Satan imparts to the air a deadly taint, and because of that deadly taint, thousands perish by that pestilence? Would you think the possibility that it is now such coronavirus, the unsolved problem today? According to Alonzo Jones, brothers and sisters, the only medium that Satan could deceive the whole world is through miracles. But what miracles? Is miracles that he could fly, brothers and sisters? Or he could perform magic? No. It is pointing to healing the diseases of the people by which it seems there is no remedy. The whole world is already, brothers and sisters, lost all their effort to find a solution, and there's no other solution, only miracle. And that miracle is genuine. That is the only thing, because the voice of inspiration says that such miracle is genuine. There are many miracles that had been performed, but this is the only miracles by which the voice of inspiration says, no, it is genuine. So we need now to watch the occurrences today, brothers and sisters, because we are about to come on the last final conflict. And that's why we are duty bound to proclaim this message. Now, I would like to read this statement in 1899. Here the statement. It is concerning Revelation 13, verse 13 and 14. I would like to read. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that are on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword, and did live. It is through miracles, brothers and sisters. It says, and I saw, Revelation 16, verse 13 to 16, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. So there must be 3 entities mentioned here, 3 personalities. The man represented by the dragon, the man represented by the beast, and the man represented by the false prophet. For they are the spirit of devils, working miracles. There are 3 personalities here that working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garment, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. Revelation 16, verse 13, 15, 14, 15, and 16. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth, Revelation 19, verse 19 and 20. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse, faithful and true, the word of God, and against his army. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worship his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone. Revelation 19, verse 19 and 20. All these passages refer to the same period of time, that is, the time just preceding the coming of the Lord and reaching to the coming of the Lord, and that period of time is just now the time in which we live. But I think this statement is applied in our days rather than in their days, brothers and sisters. And it says, the one thing especially marked in each and all of these passages is that in this time great signs and wonders, miracles, will be wrought expressly under the inspiration of Satan. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters. But that miracles is to heal disease of the people, by which that disease, brothers and sisters, it is Satan who give that disease, and Satan will be the one also to heal that disease. So think it thoroughly, brethren. And here's another statement that I would like to read. And it says here, it is entitled, Working Miracles. It says, these propositions are worthy of most serious consideration. They are not only the truth, but they are the truth for these times. For it is certain that the diseases are multiplying upon the earth. But I do fully believe that is even more pertaining to what's happening now. We call coronavirus. It says, these propositions are worthy of most serious consideration. They are not only the truth, but they are the truth for these times. For it is certain that the diseases are multiplying upon the earth and will multiply more and more as time goes on. And as diseases multiply, so the offered remedies and means of removing them will multiply. And as we have stated before in these columns, this is one of the cheap things employed by Satan in gaining power over the people in this war against the church of God. So, that is the cheap things concerning miracles according to this reading, brothers and sisters. And think it thoroughly. I would like to read this last portion. One thing especially to be noted about these things is that there will be real miracles. These false Christs and false prophets shall show, not simply pretend to show, but shall show great signs and wonders. Those miracles which he had power to do, not simply that he pretended to have power to do. They are the spirits of devils working miracles. Not simply pretending to work miracles. The false prophet that wrote miracles, not the false prophet that pretended to work. So look at the statement, brothers and sisters, given by the voice of inspiration. What kind of miracles? Real miracles. Genuine miracles, brothers and sisters. And because of that miracles, the whole world will believe a lie, brothers and sisters. And that event is no longer far distant in the days in which we are living in. And do not be very confident, because the Bible cannot be mistaken. Once your name are found not written in the Lamb's Book of Life, you cannot escape such deception. That is the message in Revelation 13 verse 8. It says, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. Revelation 13 verse 8. Meaning, any of them whose names are not written in the Lamb's Book of Life, there is no escape. They will and they shall worship the beast. That system, that demon worship, brothers and sisters. So, hoping that the Lord will bless us, and we will continue this subject on our next episode, and we'll be digging more deeper, brothers and sisters, and we'll be focusing to that event when the woman will sit on the 7 heads. And let us study closely the Bible and the Shepherd's Rod publications. So thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. May the good Lord bless you and have a wonderful evening.